Hello and welcome to Bangladesh and the World podcast brought to you by Bangladesh America Alliance. We are thrilled to have you join us. We're streaming live across X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please follow us at BD Alliance on our handle for updates and feel free to send in your questions on any of these platforms. In today's episode, we're honored to welcome a truly remarkable guest from Bangladesh, internationally acclaimed photographer, writer, human rights activist, and educator, Dr. Shahidul Alam. Hosting this special conversation is Dr. Farhana Sultana, professor at Syracuse University and a distinguished voice on global justice. Dr. Farhana, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mainu. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today's guest doesn't need any introduction to many people, but for those who are unfamiliar, let me just say he is somebody whose life and work embodies courage, creativity, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Dr. Shahidul Alam, or Shahidul Bhai, is a Bangladeshi institution builder, a photojournalist, public speaker, educator, storyteller, writer, activist, whose lens and writings have documented beauty and brutality and profoundly influenced visual storytelling and civic engagement across the global South. From founding Drick Picture Library and the Pathshala South Asian Media Institute to launching the Chobi Mela International Photography Festival, Shahidul Alam has tirelessly created spaces where stories from the majority world are told on their own terms. His images and words have challenged oppressive regimes, captured moments of resistance, and helped shape a new visual language for truth telling, particularly in South Asia and definitely in Bangladesh. Dr. Alam's commitment to social justice has often put him at odds with authorities. In 2018, he was arrested and tortured after speaking out against the then government, whose actions were quite brutal across the country. His detention sparked international condemnation and highlighted issues of press freedom in Bangladesh. And happy Press Freedom Day today. So, Dr. Alam's work not only documents events, but also inspires dialogue and action, reinforcing the role of art in societal transformation. But he's not just a chronicler of history. He's shaping the present in the wake of the 2024 July Revolution in Bangladesh, which saw a brutal government crackdown on mass protests and the subsequent overthrow of that fascist authoritarian regime, which had remained in power for a very long time. Dr. Alam has been a steadfast witness and amplifier advocating for democracy, justice, and educational equity. Through his work in media, education, and culture, focusing on institution building and mentorship, he has been a critical voice that has helped shape political and social space in and beyond Bangladesh. Of many awards and recognitions he has received, such as being listed as a Person of the Year in Time magazine in 2018, Dr. Alam is also the recipient of the Ekushe Padok, which is the second highest civilian award in Bangladesh, which he was awarded in 2024. It is an absolute honor to speak with somebody whose work has not only borne witness to change, but has catalyzed it. Shahidul Alam Bhai, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here. You do very important work, so I'm happy to be involved.
Thank you so much. So when we invited you to join this podcast series in the Bangladesh America Alliance, we wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us and educate those who don't know. Tell us a bit more about your photographic journey and into that advocacy and education with establishing institutions such as Drick, Pathshala, Chobi Mela, and so on, but also how your image is a form of also inspiring political change, how art is never separate from politics. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about that journey into photography?
Sure. I'm from a middle-class home. My parents were both academics. Uh, I had a sister who was a doctor working in the UK. This provided an opportunity for me to get higher education in the UK, relatively inexpensively. I stayed with my sister and worked weekends, evenings, holidays. to pay for my university fees. That's how I graduated. Then I ended up getting, uh, I got a research position at London University, which allowed me to do a PhD. Until then, I was on course to becoming yet another academic, like everyone else in my family. Um, that was when I became involved with the Socialist Workers' Party. I would join them in uh, marches and protests, and began to see how they used photography in their campaigns. Uh, Having lived under occupation and as a genocide survivor, I obviously had a strong interest in social justice. Out of it. So I got myself a job in a studio in London to learn the commercial side of things. It was a small studio called the Young Rascals in Acton. Uh, it taught me two skills photography schools never provide. One was dealing with complete strangers and managing finances. And I've since tried to incorporate that into my school as well. I'd saved up £2,800, which was going to be my seed capital to set up my business when I returned home. Upon my return, I decided I wanted to do something different. And I was able to give something back to my dad. Uh, Setting up the rig was in response to both a practical and a political need. Photo agencies are how photographs the world over are distributed. Most agencies were based in London, Paris, New York. Uh, Having worked with them, I realized that it was pretty much impossible for Bangladeshi photographers to meet the very steep barriers, entry barriers to these agencies. So I felt if I couldn't take the photographers to the agencies, I would bring the agency to the photographer. And we set up in Bangladesh in a very modest way initially. Um, these agencies would demand that you submit your pictures, wait for 3 years before you got any money. I knew the reality for Bangladeshi photographers was very different. I mean, they needed money for the next roll of film. So we changed our operational module. And if we sold a picture, we would try and get the money to them right away. They would buy some film, do some more work, submit more material. That was how um, things were happening. We were helping them with things like captions and all that. However, the most important issue really was that of representation. We were very tired of how Bangladeshis were depicted in international media, by NGOs, the fact that we were constantly presented as icons of poverty. Um, we started the agency in 1989. Um, and 2 years later, well, actually a little bit before that, in 1990, I mean, I had already started working as a freelance photographer documenting the resistance to General Irshad. And we were able to get him down, but we tried to distribute these pictures. No one was interested. In April 1991, we had a crisis in Bangladesh. And the New York Times got in touch with us because they wanted. Can we have slide one, please? Uh, they wanted pictures of the cyclone. Now, we had pictures of the cyclone, but we had a problem. I mean, this was the very representation that we had tried to avoid. We did not want to be known just for disasters. So now the New York Times is a big client. We are a new agency. We needed the business. It was a great opportunity. So we were in a bit of a quandary, but we decided we'd take the risk. So we went back to them to say, we have those pictures. Can you please distribute them?
I'm not sure what happened to the slide. Mino, can you pull up the slide again? I think Shahidul Alam,
Fishermen,
it cut out just for the last 5 seconds. It just cut out for the last 5 seconds. Could be internet connection in Bangladesh. Could you just repeat that last sentence?
Sure. I mean, the New York Times asked us what the story was, and we said we want a story about people's resilience, about their tenacity, about their ability to rebuild their lives. And they went ahead, and we really had the very first picture spread I'm aware of, which did not dwell on bodies or, the hardship or, the disaster images we were used to. So we had pictures of farmers planting seeds, fishermen preparing their boats to go back to sea, of people helping one another. We did have one picture of a little girl who had become an orphan, but the story was slightly different. The story was about the fact that another family, just as poor, had taken on this child, and it was their generosity we were talking about. So those were the ways in which we tried to change some of those stories. Now, can we have slide 2, please? We were trying to go international, and one of the things we tried to do was to bring in World Press Photo. In 1993, we brought over possibly the most well-known photojournalism exhibition in the world. But we did something very interesting at that time. We managed to talk. I mean, even then, the Army League and the BNP were fighting each other, killing each other in the streets. We managed to convince the two deputy leaders, Badruddin Chaudhary, who later became president, and Abdus Samad Azad, who later became foreign minister. And these two opposing parties, the two people from the two opposing parties, they cut the ribbon with the same pair of scissors. It was our attempt to talk to the political leaders to say, regardless of what petty politics you practice, we are into nation building. We want to be constructive. That is the role we want to play. But there was also the issue of representation in other ways. I mean, we were very conscious of how white
I believe we're continuing to have some streaming problems from Bangladesh, unfortunately. Pai, can you repeat that last sentence again, please?
I don't know if you are.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Internet problem?
I think there's a little bit of streaming problem from Bangladesh right now. But if you could just tell us that last sentence about the importance of this event.
Okay, so we basically got the two deputy leaders of the two parties, one who became president, one who became foreign minister later on. At that time, they were deputy leaders in opposing parties, and they cut the ribbon with the same pair of scissors. It was, for us, a way to demonstrate that we believed in nation building, and that was the role that we wanted. Spectacle, I mean, people went gaga. Sadly, we've never been able to repeat it ever again in Bangladesh, but we did do it for that one time. But there were other issues about representation. The fact that we were male, middle-class photographers, and in that sense, we were at the same end of the power structure as when it came to a woman in Islam who didn't have a door to shut on her face. Can we have slide 3, please? We were the powerful ones, and we were very concerned about the fact that mainstream media had virtually no women at that time. So we started training women photographers.
And this was mostly at DRIC, or by this time had Pathshala started? I'm not entirely sure what's happening with
the women had a show at Shilpakala Academy, a great show, but we discovered there were other issues as well. They were middle-class women, and while they'd address gender issues, they didn't ever address the class Can we go to 4, please? Slide 4. So we then decided to train working class children. And this picture is a group of kids. We took them to Bard and many other places when I was teaching them photography. Let's go to number 5. Number 5 has 2 girls, Molly and Rabia. Molly was my assistant later on. She now is a senior editor at Channel I, one of the most successful independent television channels. But these kids have grown up to become serious professionals. Some of them are my colleagues at the agency. I'm very proud of having them with us. So that is roughly when we started Pathshala. Yeah, the kids, we started training kids in 94. In 98, we started Pathshala. And that was, again, to respond to a political need. We want to challenge Western hegemony. We wanted to challenge this very
I think, Bhai, your video stalled again. So, and I'm so sorry. We're having massive streaming problems today.
No,
I'm not sure what's
on
happening in the Bangladesh end. Maybe we just have, so the audience, please bear with us if Shahidul Alam's video just pauses and stalls for a bit. If you could just repeat what happened after Pathshala started. I think you were at that point.
Where were we?
Basically how you're
Pathshala,
taking
again, the
Pathshala
idea
forward.
behind Pathshala. Yeah. So the idea behind Pathshala was, we were to fight an information war, and to fight a war, you needed warriors. And that was what Pathshala was doing. Pathshala was training the next generation of warriors, information warriors. So we set up the school. We'll go forward and back a little bit. Can we go to slide 8, please? Friend of us and Pathshala and Rick, and he came for one of the award ceremonies at Pathshala. But I'm saying this because, what happened with Pathshala was we started training the photographers. We brought in the finest photographers from all over the globe. When it started in 98, I was the only local teacher. We had Kirsten Clare, a British friend of mine, who joined me later on. Photography worldwide. They share the international stage. They are fated, they're rock stars in themselves. But more importantly for me, of the 26 teachers that we have at Pathshala, 24 are former students. So they are the ones who run the school. They argue with me constantly. They fight for the school. That's their passion. And that is really very, very wonderful, because that means that when you and I have gone, they will take ownership and they will be running this school. But I'll go back a little bit. Let's go to number 6. I'm just going 2 and 4 a little bit. So one of the things we needed to do at that time is, while the students were doing very good work, their work was not being seen internationally. And I couldn't take, I did do it once or twice. I took a few students out with me, but, I couldn't take a suitcase full of students wherever I went. So I decided I'd turn it around and have the work and the international community come.
So is this when a lot of these exhibitions went into public space?
Yes, number 6. Now I'm coming to that. So we did something else at that time. So the initial idea was to get the world to Bangladesh, which worked. But, when we looked at things like exhibitions, galleries in Bangladesh and across the world, they're very elitist spaces. And when I had my first show, I invited many people to come to the show. Guards, janitors in the companies I used to work with, none of them ever came. And I asked them why they didn't come. And they said, well, would they have let us in? Class is a big issue. So again, we felt, well, if the public was not going to come to the gallery must go to the public. So what you're seeing is a mobile exhibit that we have every Chobi Mela, where we take the exhibit to school playing fields, across boats, to bazaars. So the general public get a sense to see the work. And we have an engagement with the public that no other festival in the world has. But we also began to take on technology. Let's go to slide 7. And Chobi Mela was perhaps the first photo festival to use video conferencing, way before we had COVID and we had Zoom and all those sort of things. And we managed to get Noam Chomsky in conversation with Maheshwara Devi, who came over from India. So Didi was with us in physically in Dhaka. I was moderating. Chomsky was at MIT. And we had this wonderful video conference way before the rest of the world had actually adapted to that technology. But those were also ways in which we were adapting. And one of the things we did at DRIC, which not many people know about, is we actually introduced email to Bangladesh, again in the early 90s, because we recognized that if we were to fight this battle, we had to use every tool at our disposal. Images was one, words was another.
I think it's frozen again, but what we're going to focus on is these institutions that are being built, not just for art and photography, but also for expanding communication, representation, inclusion. And as you can see, these institutions were being brought together because of the ways that there was a lot of lack of inclusion, but also political voice. So sorry, Bhai, there was a little bit of a lag. So I just picked up on maybe talking based on some of you mentioned the DRIC and Patshala and Chobi Mela and the importance of inclusion and representation. Maybe could you tell us a little bit more about, how did you sustain these in the face of, political and economic, pressure, and in terms of bringing wider South Asia together?
Well, one of the things we did, one of the things you should know about DRIC is that it is a private limited company. While it does all this work that typically NGOs do, we are very much into social justice and human rights, but we try and make our own living by being very highly competent professionals and delivering a professional service. That means that we do not depend upon NGOs for a living. We do not depend upon the government for a living. And because we earn our own money, we can say what we want, and we're not controlled by the NGO Bureau or any of these very restrictive laws. That doesn't always mean we get away with it, but it does give us an independence that very few other organizations have. Normal companies are interested in making money. NGOs require funds from elsewhere, and therefore they're beholden to their donors. We do not suffer from either of those. So we were able to say and do things which no one else was able to. And in one of the Chobi Mela, in fact, I had been picked up in 2018. I was picked up and jailed and tortured. But while I was in jail, we decided we would continue with Chobi Mela. And I came out in November. In February 2019, we held Chobi Mela, as we had decided before. And we had earlier on invited Arundhati Roy, let's have slide 10, please, to talk to us. We hired the biggest the plug the night before the event. For unexplained reasons, they canceled the venue. So we suddenly had a superstar like Arundhati, and we had no venue. So we managed to find, and of course at that time we were very toxic. No one wanted to come near us because they knew how the government felt about us. But we managed to find a place, and It was everyone sitting on the floor, 1,000 people sitting on the floor. We spoke for 2.5 hours. They were wrapped they were enthralled. Arundhati was her brilliant self, and we managed to do it. But what we also did was, in the first session of Chobi Mela, we had a discussion on freedom of thought and expression in South Asia. And that was very interesting, because after that, we were approached by many people who had nothing to do with the arts, who wanted to know how an art organization could be so defiant in the face of such a repressive regime that they could bring Arundhati Roy, they could talk about freedom and expression and get away with it. So those were the things we were constantly doing. That's how we were bucking the trend. But I'll go back a little bit to maybe I'll just show 13. Since we're having all these breaks, I'll do a little commercial break. Let's go to 13. And here you're looking at an article on the British Journal of Photography, and it's an issue on higher education in photography. And the two institutions they mention globally are the Royal College of Art in London and Pathshala, this School of Photography in Bangladesh. And that is what we have been able to achieve, that in a country like Bangladesh with such limited resources, we've been able to build one of the finest schools of photography in the world. And right now in our gallery, we have an exhibit with work from our international students. So we have, whereas students in the past have gone from Bangladesh,
This is quite an accomplishment to build a school that has such global reputation and accomplishments that have been picked up in international media, but also has achieved and been given so many recognitions. So this is an amazing accomplishment with what Pathshala has done, and also with Chobi Mela. If I could use this as a kind of as a platform to ask the next question, which is about public education. So much of your work has been about engaging the citizenry, right? About both public education, but in terms of like education and art and photography being tools of liberation and democracy. So could you tell us that, given how much Pathshala and Chobi Mela have been given international recognition and increasingly domestic recognition, how can we build more such institutions, to produce more engaged citizens in Bangladesh and also across South Asia?
Well, the previous regime destroyed many things. They destroyed the bureaucracy, they destroyed the police, the security forces generally, the judiciary has been completely destroyed. But I think the biggest damage that they've done is how they've completely wrecked the education sector. While we might be able to recover from those other ones with good leadership, it will take us generations to recover in terms of what they've done to the education sector. But I think we need to begin by shifting our priorities. I think Bangladesh invests far too little in education, and a far bigger portion of the budget needs to be allocated to education, certainly far more than many of the unnecessary things, in my opinion, that they waste money on. We need better schools and better universities far more than we need fancy bridges. But
I think Pai's picture has stalled again. Again, apologies to the audience. Today we're having really problematic internet connections out of Bangladesh. So Pai, could you just repeat that last sentence? So we have these problems, but do you see what potential opportunities there might be in terms of rebuilding public education or even private education or hybrid?
I think investing in education, depoliticizing the education institutions are a very big part of it. That doesn't mean that students will not be involved in politics. It is that party politics will not determine educational and merit outcomes. I mean, I think those need to be very, very ingrained in us. But what we also did was we started utilizing some of the structures that existed. Rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we recognized that there was Bangladesh television, and we
Yes.
started introducing educational programs in Bangladesh television. And that began to make a difference. We then started a program called Rural Visual Journalism. So we started training rural journalists in how to use media, how to use the information technology, and talk about the stories of the rural public, which was never in mainstream. Um, then we have now, right now in our gallery, we have the Bangladesh Press Photo Contest, and we've introduced something which has never been there in any photo contest that I know about worldwide: public interest journalism.
Oh.
Of course, all journalism should be public interest journalism, but in particular, when it is lacking, I think we need to give space to it. And we are doing that now. And one of the several of the images that are on those walls are very, very telling, including things where we critique the current regime. I mean, there are many things we are doing that we think are but that doesn't mean we accept everything that is happening. And the winning photograph this year is about mob violence, which is something that should not happen and should not be tolerated. So we're making those statements as well. And while we are celebrating what has happened, we're also critiquing when it is due. So those are the things we've been trying to do. And within that, one of the things we are putting a lot of emphasis on is, again, creative learning, because learning has been very much rote learning in a country like Bangladesh. You're taught to memorize and not have critical thinking. In our case, within Pathshala, critical thinking is center of everything we do. And we train our students to become good citizens, to be thinking citizens, and to be challenging power structures. So it's not simply the fact that they learn education for a career, but they're also using education as a tool to becoming good citizens.
And that's such a central mission of education. As an educator, for me, that's personally really important. And I think this is something we have a unique opportunity right now, I think, in Bangladesh to really jumpstart that process because of the kinds of conversations we're having. So I want to then move into the events of last year, of the July Revolution of 2024. So that movement, for those who do not know, basically university students, even school children, parents, teachers, educators, but it was a student-led mass uprising that overthrew a fascist authoritarian regime that had lasted for almost 16 years. And now we have an interim government in place, and we will be having elections. And as a result, we know that the July Revolution has birthed a new Bangladesh, which we often call BD 2.0, as a way to think about the opportunities, what we've lost, what we've gained, what is possible. So, Shahidul Bhai, you've worked with students both before and during the July Revolution. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that experience, but also how did you navigate the risks of documenting both the protests and dealing with surveillance and censorship, because it was still during the regime and there was brutal crackdown. So how did you bear witness, and what does the world still need to understand about that moment? So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about those experiences of yours during last July and August in 2024.
I lost you a little bit in the middle, but I think I got the drift. Can we
I can
have
repeat. It's
slide
basically
20,
July
please?
2024 and your
No,
experience
it's
in
okay.
bearing
It's
witness.
okay. Slide 20, please. Um, it actually began much earlier in 2018 with the road safety movement. Um, and of course, at that time, what actually galvanized people. It wasn't simply about road safety. It was the fact that people had their backs against the wall, the fact that they were sick and tired of this tyrannical government that was sucking the country dry, the corruption, the nepotism, the extrajudicial killings, and everything else, the looting of the banks, all that was going on. And I was, of course, documenting that. On the 4th of August, I was taking pictures. I got attacked. My equipment got smashed. I went back on the 5th and started taking pictures again. That day, I gave an interview to Al Jazeera. That night, I was sitting exactly where I'm sitting now, at around a similar time, in fact. And they came into our flat. They blindfolded me, handcuffed me, took me away. I was tortured that night, and later I ended up in jail. And that was, of course, the beginning of that process. But this picture, if you're seeing it, is the students at that time demanding justice, which is something we've had to demand again so many years later. So, of course, once I came out of jail, what they had tried to do at that time, which is what they've done with others, is they had said to me, "You can go back, nothing on record. We will not bother you. You just need to stay quiet." And of course, I worked out that was how they did this. That was their mechanism. I refused to accept those deals. That's why I got jailed and stayed in jail for that period. But once I came out, of course, I continued speaking. And there it was a question of, saying all the things that needed to be said. And we've continued that throughout. And RIC has been an oasis within this very repressive space, because we have continued to say everything we can a show on extrajudicial killings, which they closed down. We took the government to court. Later, we did another show because the crossfire continued. And this time we were attacked in the streets. But we had the people on our side. And now I think one of the shifts that had taken place is, while they were still as repressive as they were, I think the people had gathered around us. And every time the government tried to do something, people would protest. And they were taking huge risks to come onto the streets and protest and be with us. And of course, we stayed the course. And while we were doing that, obviously the movement began in July. When the movement began, our initial statements were simply because we were writing. So that was also difficult because the internet had been closed down. So we were finding, and in fact, a friend of ours took a huge amount of risk to find ways to get our information out. So we were publishing, we were sending out pictures, and they couldn't really work out what the hell was going on. But more importantly, because that message was going out, it was still galvanizing people, and the movement got together. Then it became very hairy. Of course, they started picking up people and shooting people. So towards the end, it was also a question of sheltering the students, of making sure they were safe, finding ways to keep going, keep the resistance going during all that. But while that was happening, I think the students played an exemplary role. I remember visiting Nahid, who's now the head of NCP, at hospital. And the following day, he was picked up from the hospital and tortured again. There were all these theatrical things where they were made to sign or admit that they'd called off the meeting. But this was a dispersed movement, and the students knew well what was going on. So no one was going to buy that. And really, eventually, the government just ran out of steam. And the interesting thing was, on the 5th of August itself, this was quite phenomenal, where we'd gone out from our flat in Dhanmondi to go to Shahbag. We weren't able to cross Mirpur Road because the police and the APCs were in the streets. They shot at us. 3 of our group got hit. But we managed to regroup, and Reno and I, we got on a rickshaw. We knew the back roads. We managed to get to Shahbag, and by the time we got there, we were being garlanded. And between 15 minutes of being shot at, we were being garlanded, and it was complete euphoria. It was like 1971 again, and people were so jubilant. It was incredible. Now, that is an energy that we need to hold together. That is a passion we need to channel. And this is a moment in Bangladesh's history that we cannot lose out on.
No, absolutely not. That's quite a remarkable story. We know of so many stories of what happened in July and that moment of euphoria on August 5th. It was so sudden, with the former prime minister leaving, fleeing the country, and students, just euphoric, citizens, parents, the whole country was out on the street. And I think that spirit of July, I believe, is really spurring on the current dialogues. So you've been part of the Voice for Reform, which is a citizen dialogue platform. Could you tell us a bit more about how it, brings people together and what you hope it will attain? How can we keep the spirit of July revolution going? Because the blood is not dried. We have thousands of injured people, young people who have become maimed and disabled. We have 1,500 young people who died within the space of 3 weeks. So right now is a moment where people are articulating that they do not want to go back to what we had. Otherwise, all this blood would have been spilled for nothing. So could this platform, be an opportunity to bring forth that dialogue for, the Voice for Reform and further reforms?
Absolutely. While I say that, I should show you slide 21, because you need to see what happened. This is in front of Shahid Minar on the 3rd of August, and you will just see the sea of people that were there. And this is during curfew. This is incredible. I mean, that was the energy that people had. But yes, absolutely right. Now, I think the big difference, of course, is that for once, this was not a party led by a particular figurehead. This was, the students, of course, there were leaders within the students, but it was a dispersed leadership. There was not one single leader, which was also why it was so difficult for the regime to deal with it. But I think it implies much more than that. It implies people power. And one of the things that we must get back is, we talk about democracy, but in the end, if the person in the street is not empowered, we can never have democracy. And what we must remember, while the students did play an extremely important role, and I'm very proud of them, what we must remember is that the average person, the worker, the subaltern, who were really in the streets, they were the ones who gave the most blood. They were the ones who sacrificed the most. Public university students played an important role, but it was when private university students came on board. So it was very different. It was working class, it was well-to-do people, men, women, children, everyone in the streets. And when parents brought their kids to the streets in the face of gunfight, you cannot stop that. That was absolutely incredible. But what we must do now, which is in response to your question, Voice for Reform was set up because one of the things we were concerned about was, while there was this dialogue with political parties, with large organizations, the average person was not being consulted. Civil society was not being consulted. And we felt that, while it is important that the political parties play a role, the voice of the average person needs to be heard. And there we tried to form a very inclusive group, which includes students, men, women, people from across the political spectrum, across religious belief, a truly inclusive group of people. And we brought these ideas together. And what we're doing is, on a regular basis, we are engaging with the government, with political groups, with industry experts, and talking about issues that are burning issues for the average Bangladeshi. And that really needs to come to the fore, because at the end of the day, Bangladesh must return to its people.
Absolutely. And I think this is why a lot of people are unwilling to give up this newfound freedom. They've become more politically aware. People, especially the Gen Z who have proclaimed themselves that they were not as politically involved, now feel and understand better their role in democracy. And I believe that's at least my feeling. So I'm wondering whether we can figure out how to enable those kinds of institutions to be built back, which are enabling of that kind of public dialogue, discourse, of greater forms of democracy that are inclusive rather than that are just autocratic. So, I'm curious to know your thoughts before we head into talking about your current and future work. There's so many institutions. We started talking at the beginning of the hour about institutions that were destroyed, current reforms that are ongoing or coming forward. And are there ways to bring more people together for dialogue? Are there other platforms that we could support, so that there is ongoing forms of conversation, ongoing forms of transparency and accountability in your mind?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we are planning is on the 11th, we are actually having a forum where we inviting all the political parties, civil society groups, all the stakeholders, and the general public to enter into this dialogue. I think one of the things we need to do is to ensure that there is conversation going on, and this consultation process is happening. I mean, there have been, of course, so many of these commissions. They've come up with their ideas, but we need to ensure that this reform does take place. What we also need to ensure that the political parties, regardless of which political party comes in, buys into this, and they're not going to go back to business as usual. One of the things we need to ensure is that this horse trading, the fact that so much money is pumped in and that these oligarchs have controlled the political parties, that is something that must stop. And I think the political parties need to get a message. We have come to the streets, we will come to the streets again. This battle is not over. And this battle is not over until the very beliefs that we liberated Bangladesh for and that 2024 was about comes in. And this morning, for instance, we sat with people from the July Striti Foundation, Shahid Striti Foundation, and we also sat with people who are helping out the injured and the deceased, the families of the deceased, to make sure we could untie some of the bottlenecks that are taking place. We need to take care of the injured. We need to take care of the families of the deceased. And we have to find creative ways sometimes of solving this. And at the moment, we must also remember that a lot of this old bureaucracy still exists.
Yes.
A lot of the legacies still exist. While we've gotten rid of a few people, many people are still there. And we absolutely need to have a complete purge of this system where this autocracy, this fascism, if you like, cannot continue. And that people power is what will determine where Bangladesh heads next.
I absolutely agree. And I believe this is where what we started off with in terms of the power of storytelling, the power of photography, the power of narrating, that kind of a photographic awareness raising, I believe will continue to play a really critical role. We cannot have that return to that fascism. Otherwise, all of this would have been for nothing. One of the things that has come up repeatedly is, looking ahead, what can the average people do? How can they get further involved? And I think you've given us some great pointers. Get involved in more dialogue, get involved in more of these conversations, attend these sessions, meetings, hold the street rallies if you must, but also be aware that the roots, you may have lopped off some of the branches and head of the tree, but the roots remain of that old structure. And there needs to be continual forces of accountability of going onto the streets. So this brings me to one of our kind of concluding questions. So looking ahead, what projects are you particularly passionate about, given this moment in time. We are 8 months into this current situation, this post-fascist, post-July Revolution or BD 2.0. We have an interim government that is headed by a Nobel laureate. He's quite well loved by a lot of the young people. They're the ones who put him to lead the interim government. So where do you think your ongoing and future projects will lead in terms of this current, or as you know, I guess, to use Gramsci, in this interregnum, in this moment where things can go in any direction, in this certain fragile democracy building? So I know you've worked on issues around environment, on political prisoners, on misinformation. Maybe you could just tell us briefly about those or any of the others that you've got going that will help keep the July Revolution alive, hopefully.
Yeah, a whole range of things. You mentioned environment. One of the things we're doing is producing a film on the river Burigonga, trying to retrieve it, trying to bring it back to its old state. The fact that land grabbers and industrial pollution and all sorts of corruption have led to this very important asset of ours being destroyed. So we're trying to bring that back. We're trying to use the film to initiate a campaign. We're doing that with National Geographic. One of the very important things we're trying right now is a mentorship program for student leaders. We recognize that the students and the youth will play a very important role in the days to come, and we want to prepare them for those sort of things. So we want to coach them and bring them up to speed, basically, so they can actually deliver what they're capable of. What we're also doing is, for instance, later this month, we are having a session in the House of Commons in London, and one at SOAS in London, where we are talking about some of the issues, including the incredible misinformation campaign that has been going on that has deceived so much of the West and Western leaders. So we want to correct some of those misinformations, but we're also doing fun things. One is to have a song for Bangladesh, and you must know this the song, the guy Red One, who's done the songs for Madonna and Lady Gaga and for FIFA and things like that. Well, he is right now writing a song for us, which we hope will be a celebratory song which will go across the world and hopefully hit the charts. So we're trying multiple things.
Oh, that's really wonderful. So let me just try to bring it together so we have some questions from the public in the remaining minutes. So, what advice would you offer to emerging artists, photographers, journalists, in terms of thinking about striving to make a difference in their communities, to build a better future in this moment? And, what gives you hope about Bangladesh more broadly? So it's a two-parted question. So what advice would you give to emerging artists, photographers, journalists, activists? And then also what gives you hope for Bangladesh into the future?
I think July was hope, 2018 was hope, and the youth is hope. So, and I continue to believe in that, but I will go beyond that in the sense that I think we also need a little bit of self-reflection. Of course, Hasina was a tyrant, and the military, the police, the bureaucracy all ganged up on the people. But I think they got away with it, not just because they did what they did, but because too many good people were silent. People tell me that I was very brave. I don't think I was. I said what was the conversation piece in every tea stall, in every street corner. But I think people in position, people who were privileged, chose to stay quiet, chose to take advantage in some cases of what was an offer, and in many ways were complicit. I think they were co-opted into this regime. And in that sense, not only are they culpable, but they must also remember that it was their silence that allowed this to happen. And that is something we must remember. We must never stay silent again. We must never let tyranny emerge. We must never let it thrive. And we must nip it at the bud. And the only way we'll do that is if we're constantly vigilant about any action which is anti-democratic, any action which goes against the interests of the people, and any interest which tries to take it back to the previous situations that we had.
That's absolutely spot on in terms of the conversations a lot of the diaspora Bangladeshis are having, that what kinds of silences allowed hegemony of a regime flourishes when good people stay silent. And then suddenly a lot of young people gave hope that you don't have to stay silent. So if more people are, I think, more aware now, more vocal now, and that is one hope that at least I have, that going into the future, that Bangladesh will learn from the work that you've done throughout decades, from DRIC to Patshala to Chobi Mela, to how your own political imprisonment spurred on more collective action from people, and also right now Bangladesh has found a voice, and we should not give that up readily, and we should recognize that self-reflexivity is so important, that we have to both learn and unlearn to relearn, so that we can foster these kinds of collective protective of democracy, of protective of human rights. So I want to open it up to kind of audience questions, but Shahidul Alam Bhai, thank you so much for your vision, for your resilience for so long, and your relentless truth-telling. I think that's something we can all learn about, remaining vigilant, about being critically self-reflective, about engaging a wider public. And, so thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to turn to some of the audience questions, but I want to tell our viewers that you can learn more about Dr. Shahidul Alam's work at the DRIC website, along with various other websites that have hosted his work. And if you enjoyed this conversation, despite some of our internet connectivity issues, please, join us again in future Bangladesh America Alliance podcasts. But you can watch this one at your leisure on our YouTube channel, where you can share the episodes, but then you can also catch up also on our social media handles on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter or X. And the handle is BDUS Alliance. And I will now turn it over to Mainul to ask some questions from our audience. Thank you so much, Shahidul Alam Bhai.
Thank you, Farhana and Shahidul Alam Bhai. A few questions from our audience. I can just read them over, I think, a few of them. One was, somebody asked, basically, recent project address issues like recovery of the Buriganga River. How do you integrate environmental concerns into your activism? And what role does community engagement play in these environmental initiatives?
Well, environmental justice is as crucial as anything else. And one must remember that we are an agrarian community. It's a country that still has so many rivers, despite the fact that some of them have gone. But what we've been doing is working at multiple levels. One of the things we were involved in was called the Citizen Platform for Climate Change, where we highlighted best case scenarios, good examples, and we told those stories. I mean, we are about storytelling. And I think one of the things we can do is, as part of our education system, we need to bring up our children to be respectful of nature, of our environment. And what has happened really is it's these oligarchs who've gone for short-term gain, forgetting that the future of their next generations is also in this land. Perhaps they feel that their children will go away and study elsewhere. But at the end of the day, if this is our land, then we have to preserve it. So that's something we've done from a very early time. I mean, in terms of even Patshala, when it was a one-storied building, now it's a 10-storied building. We were using renewable energy. We were recycling things. And so it was a lived experience. And We did research on the Buriganga. We are now doing the film, which will come out. Once the film comes out, we will actually engage in a campaign and hopefully bring in not only people, but the government and work together to ensure that, we're not robbed of our land in this way. You had another part to your question.
Yes. So, what role does community engagement play in these environmental initiatives?
Yeah. So in a sense, they're linked. And what we have done even already is once we did the research, we actually opened it up to the private sector, to the public sector, to everyone to look to see what had happened. And some of the things we discovered also was fascinating. The fact that we worked with a very tiny budget, but we discovered that, thousands of crores of taka had been spent in World Bank projects and other projects on the River Buriganga, which had resulted in nothing. So that level of scrutiny also needs to happen. I mean, we need to be aware of where we're a country with limited resources, and we simply do not have the luxury of squandering it like that. And I think the public needs to be far more engaged in ensuring that we find out where every taka is going, who's spending it, who it is for, and whether it's used in the way it was intended. So those are things we're doing. But what we also do is public storytelling. I mean, we use mainstream media, we use social media, we do exhibits, we do campaigns, and we bring in people, and we use culture. I mean, essentially, there are three strands of intervention we're involved in: media, education, and culture. And across these three strands, we try and exert pressure upon the political space so they cannot get away with their indiscretions. But we also create a space for the public to get engaged.
Awesome. The following question is, if you have to leave one message for the next generation, what would it be?
Never give up.
Okay, that's a good one. And another question, I think probably the
Well,
last
I would
one.
like to add something. I
Sure,
should
sure.
do. I have a short answer. But I think we underestimate our own strength. Sure, they have guns, they have weapons of other sort, they have money, they have muscle. We have ourselves, and the strength of the people is something we should never underestimate. And July was evidence of that. They had everything on their side, yet it was a peaceful resistance, but it ended up bringing down the most tyrannical regime that we've ever had. If that can be done, it can be done again, and that should be an example to the rest of the world, because tyranny is not unique to Bangladesh. It's happening in our neighboring countries. It's happening in where you are, and in all these places. I think the people need to rise.
That's if I can add on to that, that's just such a hopeful, but also one of the critical messages we need to learn, especially as democracy is being eroded. Even right now, I'm based in the United States, and that's definitely being rolled back. But, going to the point you made about like the importance of culture, media, and, education as the strategy, but, with the goal to both increase public awareness, public civic engagement, but also as a political pressure. So I think that attitude of not giving up, I think, is so important to continue to pull from different sources in order to have that kind of carve out that political space, carve out that political voice, whether it's on environmental issues such as, water, river, climate change, or on, electoral processes, or in representation. And I think that that's the hopefulness that we should carry forward. So I just want our audience to keep up with that. But I'll go back to Mainul. I know you have one more question,
One more
then
question.
we'll wrap up.
Yes. So after everything from imprisonments to global exhibitions, what keeps you going every day?
I think the knowledge that I'm very privileged. This country has given me so much. And that is one thing I would like to remind people of. I mean, I have nothing against people going abroad or whatever else, but this nation has built has created the opportunities that have created doctors, engineers, whatever, with very limited resources. And these people go to countries like yours and serve them, people who've invested nothing in these people, and your tax dollars go to bombing Palestine and all those sort of things. And I think it was time for payback, which is why I'm very happy you're doing what you're doing, because I think the diaspora has a huge role to play. And what keeps me going is the fact that I see that energy in the streets. I see that energy in the average person. And the fact that while so many of the privileged have sold out, the average person on the Bangladeshi street are still true to their beliefs. And they're the ones that give me hope.
With that, I think what a great ending and a positive message for the next generation. I think with that, it's going to be a better ending for us to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today. Hope to bring you back sometime in near future for more interesting topics or discussions. Thank you.
And hopefully the internet will stay.
Thank you so much, Shahidul Alam Bhai. We are so grateful for the time you've given us. And we hope to interact with you again, because these are the kinds of messages we're trying to get out, that don't write off Bangladesh. The revolution is ongoing. The revolution will be podcasted and televised. We will share, we will collaborate, we will build a more resilient, more inclusive, more representative, more democratic Bangladesh. And we cannot give up what BD 2.0 meant and what July Revolution represents. So thank you again so much. And thank you all our viewers. Please catch up again on the Bangladesh America Alliance at our social media handles across Facebook, Twitter, or X, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. You can streamline any of our episodes at any time. So we're going to close it out now. And thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhai.